Jonathan Price, the elusive CEO of a tech giant, had always been a man of secrets, but when he disappeared with $120 million in cryptocurrency, he became the most wanted fugitive in the world. Behind him, Orbis One, an exclusive network of corporate elites, was pulling the strings of a global financial conspiracy that threatened to dismantle economies and control nations. As federal agents closed in, they uncovered a shocking truth. Price wasn't just running from the law, he was running toward the most dangerous and covert operation the world had ever seen. In the early hours of a Monday morning, the world was hit with a political shockwave. Former President Donald J. Trump, speaking at a press conference from his private estate in Florida, declared a 245% tariff on all Chinese imports. The announcement was sudden, aggressive, and without warning. Almost immediately, financial markets trembled. Stocks plummeted, shipping companies halted operations mid-transit, and news outlets scrambled to understand the implications. Economists labeled it the most extreme tariff move in modern U.S. history. The message was clear. The era of diplomacy was over, and economic war had begun. Trump's justification was framed around national security and economic independence. He accused China of manipulating trade, stealing intellectual property, and undermining American manufacturing. The tariff, he claimed, was not just about money, it was about protecting the country's future. Some hailed the move as bold, returned to tough negotiations. Others called it reckless and dangerous. But while public attention focused on the global fallout, very few noticed the subtle shifts happening behind closed doors. Within hours, companies across the U.S. began scrambling. Supply chains broke down. Importers were stuck with goods they could no longer afford to bring in. Retailers forecasted shortages. Prices on essential electronics and consumer goods spiked. Meanwhile, a small but powerful group of individuals watched the chaos unfold with a different kind of interest. These were not politicians or pundits. They were CEOs, board members, and high-level executives from some of America's most influential corporations. For them, the announcement was not a problem. It was an opportunity. Behind polished conference room doors and encrypted email servers, a plan years in the making was about to unfold. This group had anticipated a tariff surge and had been preparing for the perfect moment to strike. With legal trade routes disrupted and panic in the market, they knew they could exploit the system, funnel illicit goods through shadowy suppliers, and rake in enormous profits while the world focused on politics. The global media called it a turning point in U.S.-China relations, but no one realized that it would also be the opening move in one of the most complex and bizarre financial crimes the modern world had ever seen. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the real story had only just begun. As the public grappled with the fallout from the massive tariff announcement, a hidden network quietly came alive. Deep within the corridors of America's corporate elite, a secretive alliance known only to its members as Orbis One began executing a plan that had been in motion for years. Composed of a select group of CEOs and executives from top-tier industries, technology, logistics, pharmaceuticals, and defense, they had long predicted a political upheaval like this. What appeared to the outside world as chaos and confusion was, to them, a rare and profitable window. The origins of Orbis One traced back to private investment retreats and off-the-record meetings at global economic forums. These were not radicals or ideologues. They were strategists, obsessed with control and return on investment. Each member brought with them influence, resources, and access to proprietary data. They understood that global markets were fragile and that instability could be engineered and leveraged. The 245% tariff was the trigger they had been waiting for. In the weeks following the announcement, Orbis One moved fast. Legal trade routes between China and the United States became choked with delays and inspections, opening the door for illicit alternatives. A shadow supply chain was activated, one that bypassed regulations, used shell companies in Southeast Asia, and disguised counterfeit and high-demand goods as legal imports. Orbis One had already forged a deal with a black market supplier operating out of Guangdong province, one with quiet links to Chinese intelligence services. The supplier promised goods that were cheap, fast, and most importantly, untraceable. Tariff. Plan was simple in theory, but complex in execution. Orbis One companies would claim their inventories were sourced through emergency channels due to tariff disruptions. Regulators, overwhelmed by the sudden shifts in global trade, lacked the resources to keep up. Shipments containing knockoff semiconductors, unauthorized pharmaceuticals, and even military-grade components began slipping through customs under false documentation. Retailers unknowingly stocked their shelves with these items, and consumers had no idea they were purchasing compromised goods. Publicly, these companies appeared to be struggling like everyone else. Earnings calls referenced unprecedented challenges and geopolitical uncertainty. But behind the scenes, profits soared. As prices rose and supply dwindled, Orbis One thrived. They had turned a national crisis into a goldmine, and no one, not regulators, not the media, not even their own shareholders, suspected a thing. To move the massive profits from their secret operation without attracting attention, Orbis One turned to cryptocurrency. Traditional banking systems were too risky, too regulated, and far too easy to trace. With multiple agencies watching international wire transfers and sudden shifts in corporate finances, crypto offered the perfect solution: fast, anonymous, and nearly invisible when used correctly. Within days of the tariff announcement, Orbis One activated a series of decentralized wallets, carefully spread across different currencies and jurisdictions. The financial side of their operation had officially gone dark. The crypto strategy was managed by a select team of insiders, many with backgrounds in cybersecurity, blockchain development, and digital forensics. These weren't typical executives. They were specialists handpicked to navigate the underworld of digital finance. Using a combination of Bitcoin, Monero, and Ethereum, they created a system of layered transactions designed to obscure origins and destinations. Funds moved through dozens of wallets in minutes, hopped through exchanges in crypto-friendly countries, and were then converted into stable assets or reinvested into more shipments. At the heart of the system was a platform built exclusively for Orbis One, an encrypted trading hub called Shadebridge. It was never listed publicly and could only be accessed via secure invite codes. Shadebridge functioned like a private crypto exchange, allowing members to send funds, convert currencies, and track shipments without leaving a trace on public ledgers. It also housed a forum where operations were discussed, strategies updated, and digital identities maintained. The Chinese supplier, known only by the alias White Lake, operated through similar methods. He insisted on Monero for all high-risk transactions due to its enhanced privacy features. His side of the operation used cold wallets and hard drives, smuggled through diplomatic channels. In return, he delivered goods that were impossible to source legally under the new tariffs: cutting-edge tech components, synthetic drugs, and restricted surveillance equipment. Orbis One funneled tens of millions through Shadebridge in just the first month. With each transaction, they grew bolder. Their confidence in the system's secrecy only increased. But what they didn't know was that one of their own, someone with access to crypto logs and transaction histories, had quietly begun copying data. A crack had formed in the code, and the fallout would be devastating. 3 months after the tariff announcement, an unmarked envelope arrived at the Washington Post's investigative desk. Inside was a plain black USB drive, unbranded and wrapped in a thin sheet of foil. No note, no return address, just a single device carrying files that would launch one of the most explosive federal investigations in years. The contents were dense transaction logs, shipping records, internal memos, and a spreadsheet titled Chaos Cycle Phase 2. It was enough to suggest that something far larger than tariff manipulation was taking place. The newspaper handed the drive over to federal authorities within hours. What followed was the birth of Operation Phoenix, a multi-agency task force combining resources from the FBI, IRS, DHS, and the U.S. Department of Commerce. Analysts worked around the clock decrypting files, tracing crypto transactions, and matching shipment records with customs entries. The spreadsheet outlined an entire strategy. It described phases of economic disruption, artificial shortages, and planned inflation across key industries. Names were redacted, but company codes and financial timestamps matched real businesses. The plan wasn't just about profit. It was about controlling the flow of goods during a crisis of their own making. The first clue that validated the information was a shipment of computer chips that had entered the country under a fake customs declaration. The chips, traced to a warehouse in Long Beach, were nearly identical to a banned Chinese model linked to backdoor surveillance capabilities. The serial numbers had been partially filed down. The invoice listed them as audio interfaces. When the warehouse was raided, agents found more than electronics. There were pallets of generic prescription pills, repackaged with U.S. pharmaceutical labels. All signs pointed to a wide-reaching counterfeit operation, masked by the tariff chaos. Investigators also discovered crypto transfers linking several Orbis One-affiliated companies to offshore wallets in the Seychelles and Cayman Islands. Same wallets appeared in the USB drive's transaction logs. Each move confirmed the whistleblower's data was legitimate. But who had leaked the information remained a mystery. The files were clean, no metadata, no user tags, no fingerprints. Whoever had exposed the operation had covered their tracks completely. But one thing was now certain. This was no ordinary white-collar crime. It was organized, international, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Just as federal agents began closing in on the core members of Orbis One, one of the most critical figures in the operation vanished. Jonathan Price, a high-profile executive in a multinational tech firm, disappeared without warning. He had been on every internal list of persons of interest since the early days of Operation Phoenix. His name had appeared in several transaction logs, and his company's shipping records were riddled with discrepancies. But before he could be brought in for questioning, Price simply disappeared. Security footage from a private airstrip in Nevada showed Price boarding a sleek, unregistered jet in the middle of the night. No crew names were listed. No flight plan was filed. Less than 20 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft's transponder was turned off over the Pacific Ocean. It had vanished from radar. The next morning, his office in Silicon Valley was empty. His home was undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, no goodbye letters, no alerts from family. It was as if he had stepped out for lunch and never returned. It didn't take long for investigators to uncover what he had taken with him. Over $120 million in cryptocurrency, siphoned from various Orbis One wallets during a 48-hour window just before his disappearance. Using advanced blockchain tracing tools, agents found that the funds had been moved in small, rapid-fire transactions, jumping through hundreds of wallets, before ending up in mixers that made them almost impossible to follow. From there, the trail went cold. What was most alarming wasn't just that Price had disappeared with the money. It was that he had also been the architect behind Shadebridge, the private crypto platform that Orbis One used to conduct its illicit transactions. His disappearance meant not only the loss of a suspect, but the potential destruction of key evidence. With Price gone, investigators feared access to certain encrypted records would be permanently lost. The disappearance sent shockwaves through both law enforcement and the corporate world. News outlets ran headlines about the crypto executive on the run, while stock prices of companies linked to Orbis One began to tumble. For the first time, the public was beginning to sense that something serious was unfolding. What started as a bold political move had now become a full-blown international manhunt, and Jonathan Price had just become the most wanted executive in the world. As the hunt for Jonathan Price intensified, federal agents began examining the larger logistics network connected to Orbis One. With supply chains fractured by the new tariffs, many companies had resorted to alternative routes to maintain their inventory levels. On the surface, it seemed like legitimate damage control, but a closer look at import logs revealed something troubling: an unusual surge in cargo passing through lesser-known ports in Southeast Asia, particularly from Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. These shipments were flagged as low priority, and often passed inspection with minimal oversight. That's where the trail led. Using information pulled from Shadebridge and the USB leak, authorities tracked several of these shipments to U.S. distribution centers. What they found was staggering. Containers filled with electronics, medical equipment, and software packages bore convincing labels and paperwork, but the contents were either counterfeit or repurposed. Some computer components matched restricted designs originating from Chinese military contractors. Others, like surveillance drones and encrypted communications hardware, were outright banned for import. These weren't simply black market goods. They were part of a sophisticated smuggling network tailored to capitalize on the tariff-induced confusion. Further investigation revealed how the operation worked. Products were shipped from China to shell companies in Southeast Asia, where documentation was altered. From there, goods were sent to the U.S. under the guise of locally manufactured or rebranded items. Customs inspections were sparse, due in part to overworked agents and the sheer volume of redirected trade traffic. Orbis One companies then received the shipments, integrating the products into their own inventories and selling them at inflated prices. Every aspect of the system was engineered to appear legitimate. Invoices were doctored with AI-generated signatures, tracking data was spoofed, and even customer support hotlines for the fake products were staffed by paid actors reading from scripts. It was industrial fraud at a scale rarely seen, and all of it operated under the radar of international trade monitors. The presence of restricted military technology brought new urgency to the investigation. Intelligence agencies began taking interest. What began as an economic crime now had national security implications. There was growing suspicion that this wasn't just about profit anymore. Someone, somewhere, was using the chaos for something more dangerous. And Orbis One was right at the center of it. Interpol finally caught a break when a tip from a cryptocurrency exchange in Zurich flagged suspicious withdrawals connected to one of the wallets traced back to Jonathan Price. The funds had been converted into privacy coins and used to purchase land and property in a remote region of the Swiss Alps. Within days, a small team of agents was dispatched to investigate the site, a secluded chalet nestled into the side of a mountain, far from any village or road. It had been paid for in full, in crypto, through a series of shell companies that led nowhere. The safe house was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems, blackout curtains, and satellite communication arrays. But when agents finally breached the property, it was empty. There were no signs of struggle, no personal belongings, and no digital devices left behind, except for one burner phone and a USB drive carefully placed on the main desk. The phone was dead. The USB drive, however, contained a single encrypted folder. Once cracked, it revealed only one file, a plain text document with a short message. This was only the first wave. The statement sent chills through the investigation teams. It confirmed a suspicion that had been growing among analysts. The events triggered by the 245% tariff were not a standalone plot. They were the opening act in a larger, more coordinated strategy, something more dangerous than economic sabotage. Intelligence officers began to fear that Orbis One, or at least some of its members, had ties to more than just illicit trade networks. There were signs of nation-state influence, carefully obscured behind layers of financial misdirection. Forensic teams scoured the chalet for additional clues. Hidden compartments in the walls had already been cleaned out. Hard drives had been destroyed in a microwave found scorched in the kitchen. But small details remained. Maps with markings over international shipping routes, a handwritten note in Mandarin, and an empty briefcase labeled Phase B. None of it pointed to where Price had gone, but it painted a clear picture. He had been planning this escape for months, maybe years, and he hadn't run because the operation failed. He ran because something worse was coming. Jonathan Price was gone, but his shadow still loomed. The investigation hit a turning point when federal agents intercepted an Orbis One-affiliated accountant attempting to board a private flight out of Miami. His name was Elliot Crane, a mid-level financial officer at a logistics firm suspected of laundering money for the group. At first, he denied everything, insisting he was fleeing due to unrelated financial troubles. But after hours of questioning and the threat of multiple federal charges, he broke. In exchange for immunity and protection, Crane handed over documents, passwords, and, most crucially, a list of user aliases from the Shadebridge platform. Among the files was a revelation that sent shockwaves through the task force. Several names on the list matched contractors and subcontractors tied to U.S. defense projects. These were people with security clearance, access to sensitive data, and influence in procurement chains. It wasn't just big business exploiting a trade loophole anymore. It was an infiltration, and the deeper agents dug, the more unsettling it became. Crane also revealed the existence of a second operational phase referred to internally as Black Needle. It had been mentioned only in encrypted channels and redacted planning documents, but according to him, it was scheduled to activate within the next 6 months. The goal wasn't just to disrupt trade. Black Needle was designed to target critical infrastructure, energy grids, communication networks, and medical supply chains by inserting counterfeit or vulnerable components into systems that Americans relied on every day. The magnitude of the threat forced Operation Phoenix to escalate. Intelligence agencies were pulled in full force. Homeland Security began conducting silent reviews of infrastructure contracts, while the NSA tracked the spread of corrupted hardware. At the same time, a digital task force began scanning blockchain networks for any sign that Black Needle had already begun to move into place. Back in custody, Crane provided access to internal communications, some of which detailed covert meetings between Orbis One members and unidentified intermediaries with connections to foreign intelligence networks. It became clear that this wasn't simply about money. It was about access, manipulation, and control. The facade of a rogue financial scheme was gone. What remained was something far more complex, a hybrid of corporate greed and geopolitical strategy. And the clock was ticking. As federal agents raced against time to dismantle the remaining threads of Orbis One's operation, they began to notice an unsettling pattern. Several of the companies involved in the conspiracy, once seen as legitimate corporations, suddenly filed for bankruptcy or announced massive layoffs. On the surface, it appeared to be a natural response to the tumultuous trade environment created by the tariff. But for those closely monitoring the situation, the timing felt suspiciously orchestrated. Bankruptcy filings were quickly flagged for their suspiciously clean records. Debts were settled, assets liquidated, and inventories moved in record time, with millions of dollars vanishing into unknown accounts. The corporations in question had conveniently managed to eliminate any evidence of wrongdoing, including vast sums of money linked to illicit shipments and crypto transactions. These companies, once considered key players in the operation, were now being used as decoys to hide the true nature of Orbis One's wealth and assets. As agents dug deeper into the records, they discovered the masterstroke of the plan. Orbis One's executives, knowing that law enforcement was closing in, had strategically arranged these bankruptcies to erase the financial footprint of their operations. It was a calculated move to both divert attention and erase any liabilities that could be traced back to them. But in doing so, they had inadvertently set off a chain reaction. The complex legal maneuvers used to liquidate assets left gaping holes in the financial system, drawing attention from regulators who now had to deal with the fallout. Even worse, the bankruptcy filings revealed that assets had been funneled into offshore accounts linked to shell companies, but these were not the usual tax havens. The money had been redirected to obscure financial jurisdictions, places with little to no financial oversight, where money could be used to further their covert activities. Some of these accounts were traced to regions with known ties to international criminal syndicates. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer. It wasn't just a financial crime. It was a grand-scale operation to destabilize global markets and extract wealth from countries already teetering on the edge of economic collapse. Orbis One had planned for a full financial reset, manipulating bankruptcy laws to escape scrutiny while ensuring their profits remained intact. It was the perfect crime, except for one thing. Their overconfidence had left a trail, and the investigation was far from over. The deeper authorities dug, the more they realized they hadn't just disrupted trade, they had nearly brought down entire industries. And somewhere in the tangled mess, Jonathan Price remained the key to unlocking the final pieces of the puzzle. As the investigation reached its boiling point, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A former employee of Orbis One's logistics division, who had been quietly monitoring the unfolding scandal from afar, reached out to the FBI. His name was William Shaw, and he had left the company 2 years earlier, disillusioned with what he had witnessed during his time in the organization. Shaw had been in charge of managing the offshore accounts and facilitating many of the covert transactions that had now been exposed. His guilt over the operation's vast scope and its potential to ruin economies and lives had finally compelled him to speak out. Shaw's inside information was invaluable. He provided agents with a comprehensive list of shell companies and their associated bank accounts, some of which were still operational and active despite the public bankruptcies. But it wasn't just about the money. Shaw revealed that a significant portion of the cryptocurrency funds had been funneled into a network of servers spread across several countries, each containing files that detailed the long-term objectives of Orbis One's backers. These files were encrypted, but Shaw had been given limited access during his tenure. He knew enough to believe that the plan hadn't just been about creating economic chaos, it was about long-term global domination through technological control. With Shaw's testimony in hand, the task force launched a multi-nation cyber operation to seize the servers before they could be destroyed or relocated. Agents worked tirelessly, with teams in Europe, Asia, and North America, to pinpoint the physical locations of the servers and deploy digital teams to crack the encryption. It was a race against time. If Orbis One's final phase, Black Needle, was about to unfold, the authorities had to act fast. Weeks of relentless cyber warfare culminated in a dramatic raid in a small village in the Swiss Alps.